Welcome to the family. If you enjoy powerful stories and wild adventures, subscribe now, hit like and share with someone who will love it too. The slave markets of Terminus Station reeked of despair and disinfectant. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the crowded corridors, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury. He'd seen many horrors in his 30 years traversing the galaxy, but the sight of sentient beings chained and sold like livestock never failed to ignite something primal within him. His mission was simple: gather intelligence on the Vaxian Empire's newest trade routes. But as he passed cage after cage of alien captives, his steps slowed. In the corner of the vast marketplace, a small figure caught his attention. She couldn't have been more than 16 in human years, though her species aged differently. Her blue-tinged skin was marked with the distinctive silver patterns of the Kalari people, a race known throughout the galaxy for their telepathic abilities and gentle nature. The girl's large violet eyes held a depth of sorrow that made Jake's chest tighten. "Ah, you have good taste, human," rasped the Vaxian slave trader, his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile. "This one is special. Pure Kalari bloodline, untrained telepathic potential. She'd make an excellent servant, or—" His implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his concealed weapon, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What's her story?" "Orbital bombardment of Kalar Prime 3 cycles ago. We saved the survivors, gave them purpose." The trader's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "This one's been difficult, though. Refuses to eat, won't respond to conditioning. Might need to liquidate her soon." The girl's eyes met Jake's, and in that moment something passed between them. Not telepathy, her abilities were clearly suppressed by the neural dampener around her neck, but something more fundamental. Recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of one conscious being seeing another. "I'll take her," Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. The transaction was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Credits changed hands, ownership papers were processed, and suddenly Jake found himself responsible for another life. As they walked toward his ship, the girl remained silent, her bare feet making no sound on the metal decking. It wasn't until they were aboard his vessel, the Defiant, that she finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, musical despite the fear that colored every word. "You bought me to use me," she said, not looking at him. "I understand. I will not resist." Jake knelt down to her level, his movements slow and deliberate. "What's your name?" "Lila," she replied, confusion flickering across her features. "Lila, my name is Jake. I didn't buy you to use you. I bought you to free you." He reached toward the neural dampener around her neck, but she flinched back violently. "No, please, don't remove it. They said if anyone ever takes it off without the proper codes, it will kill me. They showed us what happens to others who tried." Jake's jaw clenched. The Vaxians were thorough in their cruelty. "Then I'll find another way. I promise you, Lila. I will get that thing off you, and I will get you home to your people." Lila's eyes widened. In Kalari culture, promises were sacred bonds, something the Vaxians had exploited ruthlessly during their conquest. "You don't understand what you're saying. Humans don't—" "Humans always keep their word," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Always." Tears began to flow down Lila's cheeks as she shook her head desperately. "Please don't promise something impossible. I've heard what happens to those who make promises to my people. The guilt will destroy you when you fail." But Jake had already made his choice. Standing, he activated his ship's communication system and began plotting a course that would change both their lives forever. 3 weeks into their journey, Jake had transformed a section of his cargo bay into a makeshift laboratory. The Defiant wasn't built for research, but necessity had a way of inspiring creativity. Medical scanners, quantum computers, and biotechnology databases filled every available surface as Jake worked around the clock to understand the neural dampener's construction. Lila watched from a safe distance, curled up in the corner on a pile of blankets. She'd grown somewhat comfortable aboard the ship, though she still flinched whenever Jake moved too quickly. The dampener around her neck had become an ever-present reminder of her captivity, its soft blue glow pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The neural pathways are more complex than I initially thought, Jake muttered, studying the scanned images on his primary monitor. The Vaxians didn't just suppress your telepathic abilities, they've created a feedback loop that would cause massive brain trauma if improperly removed. Lila pulled her knees closer to her chest. I told you it was impossible. Please, Jake, just take me to any neutral world. I can make a life there somehow. Jake looked up from his work, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. Do you know what my ship's name means? Defiant. She shook her head. It means refusing to give up even when everything seems hopeless. Especially then. He turned back to the monitor, highlighting a particular neural cluster. Your people's telepathic abilities aren't just mental. They're tied to quantum resonances in your brain tissue. The dampener creates artificial interference patterns, and if you disrupt those patterns incorrectly, catastrophic neural cascade, death within minutes. Jake's honesty was brutal but necessary. But here's what the Vaxians didn't count on. Humans are really good at solving impossible problems. Over the following days, Jake dove deeper into xenobiology research than any human had before. He studied Kalari physiology, quantum mechanics, and neural engineering with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Lila found herself drawn into his work, despite her fears, her natural telepathic intuition helping her understand concepts that pure logic couldn't grasp. Your people have a saying, Jake said one evening as they shared a simple meal, about promises being the threads that bind souls together. Lila nearly choked on her food. How do you know that? It's not in any database. We never shared that with outsiders. I've been learning everything I can about Kalari culture. There are survivors scattered across the galaxy. Some of them remember the old ways. Jake's expression grew distant. They also told me what happens to your people when someone breaks a promise made to them. The color drained from Lila's face. Jake, no, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. When someone breaks a sacred promise to a Kalari, you feel their guilt and pain as if it were your own. It can drive your people mad, make them take their own lives. That's why the Vaxians used false promises as a weapon during the conquest. Lila's hands trembled. Then you know why you have to stop. Please, I'm begging you. Release yourself from this promise before it destroys you. I've seen what happens. I've felt the death screams of my people when their human captors realized they couldn't deliver on their word. Jake stood and walked to his workstation, pulling up a new set of calculations. That's exactly why I can't stop. Every broken promise made to your people is a wound in the universe. But every kept promise? He smiled for the first time since they'd met. Every kept promise heals something that was broken. As if responding to his words, Lila's dampener pulsed brighter, and for just a moment she felt the faintest echo of hope, not her own but radiating from the human across the room. Even through the neural suppression, his determination blazed like a star. For the first time since her world died, Lila began to believe that maybe, just maybe, some promises were meant to be kept. The breakthrough came at 0347 hours ship time. Jake had been awake for 36 straight hours, surviving on stim patches and sheer stubbornness, when the quantum resonance patterns finally aligned in his calculations. The neural dampener's architecture became clear, like a puzzle suddenly, showing its solution. Lila, he called softly, not wanting to startle her from sleep. She'd been having nightmares lately, memories of Kilar Prime's destruction bleeding through the dampener's suppression. I think I found something. She emerged from her makeshift bedroom, rubbing her eyes. The past month aboard the Defiant had been the safest she'd felt since the invasion, but hope was still a dangerous emotion for her kind. The dampener isn't just one device, Jake explained, his fingers dancing over the holographic display. It's a network of 3 separate quantum inhibitors working in sequence. The Vaxians made everyone think it was a single unit to hide the real elegant solution. Lila approached cautiously, studying the rotating model of her neural dampener. 3 units? Primary suppressor, quantum harmonizer, and a fail-safe destructor. They're linked by entangled particles, which means they communicate instantaneously regardless of distance. Jake highlighted each component in different colors. The genius is in the sequence. You can't just remove them all at once. You have to disable them in the exact right order, with precise timing between each step. How precise? Microseconds, and if you get the sequence wrong... Jake didn't need to finish the sentence. They'd both seen the medical scans of failed removal attempts. Lila sank into a nearby chair, the weight of impossibility settling on her shoulders again. Even if you know the sequence, how could anyone achieve that kind of precision, especially with living neural tissue involved? Jake's smile was grim but determined. That's where human stubbornness comes in handy. We don't accept that something can't be done. We just figure out how to do it anyway. He pulled up another display showing the Defiant's modified surgical bay. Over the past weeks, Jake had quietly cannibalized half his ship's systems to create a precision medical suite that rivaled anything in the core worlds. Quantum surgical lasers calibrated to Kalari neural frequencies, temporal stabilizers to maintain microsecond timing accuracy, and this, he gestured to a crown-like device bristling with sensors, is a neural interface I designed specifically for your species' brainwave patterns. Lila stared at the apparatus with growing horror. Jake, you're talking about performing experimental surgery on an alien species using equipment you built yourself. One mistake and I'm dead. Yes. His simple honesty cut through her fear like a blade. No false reassurances, no meaningless platitudes, just the truth laid bare. There's something else, Jake continued, his voice growing quiet. I've been in contact with the Kalari Survivors Network. They've agreed to help. Lila's head snapped up. That's impossible. My people don't trust anyone anymore, especially humans. They don't trust promises anymore, Jake corrected. But they remember what kept promises used to mean to them. When I told them what I was trying to do, some of them agreed to provide telepathic guidance during the procedure. The implications hit Lila like a physical blow. You're asking them to link minds with me during the surgery. If something goes wrong, they'll feel my death as if it were their own. They volunteered. 6 of them, including someone who knew your family on Kalar Prime. Tears began flowing down Lila's cheeks. Aunt Vera, she survived? She's coordinating the telepathic network. She said to tell you that promises made in love are worth any risk. Jake's voice grew thick with emotion. Your people believe in this. Lila, they believe in keeping promises even when it seems impossible. Lila stood slowly, her legs shaking. She walked to the observation port and stared out at the stars. So many worlds, so many species, most of them touched by the Vaxian. Plague of broken promises and shattered trust. When? She asked finally. Tomorrow. The Kalari volunteers will be in position and I've calculated the optimal quantum alignment window. We'll have a 6-minute window when the stellar radiation is at minimum interference. Lila turned back to face him, and Jake saw something in her violet eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just hope, determination. If this works, she said, you'll have done something no human has ever done before. You'll have kept a promise that everyone said was impossible. And if it doesn't work, Lila's smile was sad but genuine, then I'll die knowing that at least one human in the galaxy was willing to risk everything to keep his word. That's something worth dying for. As they prepared for the procedure that would either free her or kill her, neither of them knew that Vaxian agents had been tracking the Defiant for the past week, closing in on their position with orders to recapture their escaped property at any cost. The surgical bay hummed with quantum energy as Jake made final calibrations to the neural interface array. 6 hours until the optimal alignment window, and every system had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. Lila lay on the surgical table, her hands folded across her chest in the traditional Kalari meditation pose. The neural dampener around her neck pulsed its steady blue rhythm, unaware that its time was nearly over. Telepathic network is establishing connection, Jake reported, monitoring the quantum communication array. One by one, indicators lit up as Kalari survivors. Across the galaxy, linked their minds to the procedure. The last light to activate was labeled Vera, Lila's aunt. Through the neural interface speakers, Vera's voice whispered in the melodic Kalari language. Lila's eyes filled with tears as she heard her aunt's words for the first time in 3 years. She says the family blessing is with you, Jake translated, having learned basic Kalari during his research, and that your mother would be proud. Tell her I love her, Lila whispered back. Tell her that if this fails, it's not Jake's fault. He's keeping his promise the only way he knows how. Jake activated the surgical protocols, and the bay filled with the soft hum of quantum resonance. The precision required was staggering. Each of the 3 dampener components had to be disabled in sequence with timing accurate to 0.3 microseconds. First component is the quantum harmonizer, Jake narrated, as much for himself as for Lila. It's designed to disrupt your natural telepathic frequencies, disabling in 3, 2, 1. The quantum surgical laser fired with silent precision, severing specific neural pathways while leaving others intact. On the monitors, Lila's brainwave patterns shifted slightly, but the dampener's blue glow remained steady. Primary suppressor next. This is the big one. It's directly interfaced with your prefrontal cortex. Jake's hands were steady, despite the sweat beading on his forehead. If the timing is off by even a microsecond, I know, Lila said softly. I trust you. The second laser pulse lasted 2.7 microseconds, precisely calculated to sever the primary suppressor's quantum entanglement with Lila's neural tissue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the dampener's blue glow began to fade. Final component is the fail-safe destructor. It's designed to flood your brain with neural toxins if the other components are removed. Jake's voice was calm, but his heart was racing. This is where most removal attempts fail. The timing window is only 0.2 microseconds. Through the quantum link, the Kalari volunteers sent waves of support and love. Lila could feel their presence like warm sunlight, giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Whatever happens, she said, thank you for trying. Thank me when it's over, Jake replied, initiating the final sequence. The last laser pulse was the shortest and most precise. It had to completely sever the destructor's connection without triggering its fail-safe protocols. Jake held his breath as quantum energy coursed through the surgical array. The dampener's glow died completely. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, like dawn breaking over a long night, Lila's eyes blazed with violet light. Her telepathic abilities, suppressed for 3 years, flooded back in a torrent of sensation and connection. She gasped, her back arching as her mind suddenly expanded beyond the confines of her skull. Through the quantum link, she could feel her aunt's joy, the celebration of the other survivors, and most powerfully, Jake's profound relief and satisfaction. It worked, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jake, it actually worked. I can feel cut everyone, you kept your promise. Jake carefully removed the now inert dampener from her neck, revealing unblemished blue skin beneath. The device that had been her prison for 3 years crumbled to ash in his hands, its quantum matrix finally disrupted. How do you feel? He asked, running medical scans to check for neural damage. Lila sat up slowly, her newfound telepathic abilities still overwhelming. Like I'm alive again. Like I'm myself again. She looked at him with wonder. I can feel your emotions, Jake. The satisfaction, the relief, but underneath it all, there's something else. Something I don't understand. Before Jake could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the ship. On the tactical display, 3 Vaxian interceptors dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. Unknown. Faisal, you are harboring stolen property, came the harsh reptilian voice over the communications array. Surrender the Kalari female immediately, or be destroyed. Jake's expression hardened as he helped Lila to her feet. Looks like the real test is just beginning. Can you handle your new abilities in a combat situation? Lila's violet eyes blazed brighter as she reached out with her restored telepathic powers, touching the minds of the Vaxian pilots. What she found there made her recoil in disgust and rage. They're not just here for me, she said, her voice tight with anger. They have a ship full of captured Kalari children, and they're planning to use me as bait to lure more survivors into a trap. Jake's hand moved to his weapon controls, his promise to free her expanding into something larger and more dangerous. Then I guess we're going to have to teach them what happens when humans make promises to people they care about. As the first Enemy weapons fire began to light up space around the Defiant. Both human and Kalari prepared for a battle that would determine not just their fate, but the future of every enslaved telepathic being in Vaxian space. The Defiant shuddered under the impact of Vaxian plasma cannons as Jake threw the ship into an evasive spiral. His freighter wasn't built for combat, but 30 years of flying dangerous routes had taught him how to make anything fight. Shields. "Had 60%, he reported, his fingers dancing over the navigation controls. "Those interceptors are fast, but they're built for capture missions, not prolonged combat." Lila gripped the co-pilot's chair, her newly restored telepathic abilities overwhelming her senses. She could feel the hostile intentions of the Vaxian pilots, their cold satisfaction at cornering what they considered runaway property. "There's something else," she said, her voice strained with concentration. "The ship they mentioned, the one with Kalari children, it's not far from here. I can sense them, Jake. They're terrified." Jake's jaw clenched as he rolled the ship to avoid another volley of plasma fire. "How many?" 12, all under 15 standard years. They've been in captivity for months. Lila's telepathic connection to her people painted a horrible picture of fear and despair. "The Vaxians are using them as bait, just like they said. When other Kalari feel their distress and come to help, they get captured too." Jake's tactical display showed the interceptors adjusting their formation, trying to box him in. Classic Predator strategy, but they made one mistake. "What's that?" Jake's smile was grim as he activated weapon systems that shouldn't have existed on a civilian freighter. Hidden panels retracted to reveal military-grade plasma cannons and torpedo tubes. "They assumed I was just a freighter captain who got lucky." The Defiant transformed from prey to predator in seconds. Jake's opening salvo caught the lead interceptor by surprise, overwhelming its shields and sending it tumbling away with half its engines destroyed. "Impossible," came the Vaxian commander's voice over the comm. "You're flying a cargo vessel." "I'm flying a ship crewed by someone who keeps his promises," Jake replied, targeting the second interceptor. "And I promise to free every Kalari in Vaxian space." Lila's eyes widened as she caught the edge of Jake's thoughts. Through her restored telepathy, she could sense the depth of his determination and the pain driving it. "Jake, there's something you're not telling me about why you made that promise in the first place." He didn't answer immediately, focused on the tactical situation. The remaining two interceptors were coordinating their attack, trying to overwhelm his shields with concentrated fire. "My sister was captured by slavers when I was 20, he said finally, his voice quiet beneath the sound of weapons fire. "By the time I found her, she'd been sold to a Vaxian research facility. They'd been experimenting on human neural tissue, trying to understand how our brains process guilt and promise-keeping." Lila's breath caught as she felt the echo of his decades-old grief. What happened to her? They broke her mind, filled her with artificial guilt over promises she'd never made, promises they forced her to believe she'd broken. She died thinking she'd failed everyone she'd ever cared about. Jake's targeting system locked onto the second interceptor. "I promised her, as she was dying, that I'd never let the Vaxians use promises as weapons again." The torpedo Jake fired didn't just destroy the second interceptor, it vaporized it completely. The remaining Vaxian ship immediately began broadcasting surrender signals. "Wait," Lila said, her telepathic senses picking up something unexpected from the surviving pilot. "He's not like the others. There's no cruelty in him, just fear." Jake's finger hesitated over the firing controls. "Vaxian pilot, identify yourself." "My name is Crix," came a younger voice, shaking with terror. "I'm not military. They conscripted me last week, said if I didn't serve, they'd sell my clutchmate to the research facilities." Lila closed her eyes, extending her telepathic abilities toward the alien pilot. What she found there surprised her. "Jake, he's telling the truth. And there's more. He knows where the prison ship is holding the Kalari children." Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "Crix, power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. If you help us rescue those children, I give you my word that you and your clutchmate will be free." "Your word means nothing to me, human," Crix replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "It should," Lila interjected over the comm system. "This human keeps his promises. I'm living." Proof of that. There was a long pause. Finally, Crix's weapon systems powered down. The prison ship is in the Vega Tertius system. It's heavily guarded, and the children are kept in neural dampeners like the one you removed from the female. Jake was already plotting a course. Then, "We'd better get moving. Those children have been in captivity long enough." As the Defiant jumped to hyperspace with its unlikely Vaxian passenger, Lila reached out with her restored abilities and touched the minds of the imprisoned children. Across the void, 12 young Kalari felt a whisper of hope for the first time in months. "Hold on," she sent to them telepathically. "Help is coming. A human who keeps his promises is coming." The response she received filled her with renewed determination. The children had heard stories of such humans, myths and legends passed down through Kalari oral tradition. Now they would learn that some myths were real. The Vega Tertius system was a graveyard of shattered worlds, perfect camouflage for a prison ship that needed to stay hidden. The Vaxian vessel Torment hung in the shadow of a dead planet, its hull bristling with weapons and scanning arrays designed to detect any rescue attempt. Jake studied the tactical readouts from the edge of the system, the Defiant running silent to avoid detection. Beside him, Lila concentrated on the telepathic whispers from the imprisoned children, while their unlikely ally Crix provided intelligence on Vaxian security protocols. "The ship has 3 detention levels," Crix explained, his reptilian features tight with anxiety. "The Kalari children are on the lowest level, in maximum security cells with individual neural dampeners. The guards rotate every 4 hours, and they have automated defense systems throughout the ship." Lila winced as she felt a spike of terror from one of the children. "They're doing something to them, some kind of conditioning process. Jake, we need to move now." "A direct assault won't work," Jake said, his mind racing through possibilities. "That ship has enough firepower to vaporize us before we get close. We need a different approach." Crix's throat sac inflated nervously. "There is one way. Prison ships like the Torment have mandatory inspection protocols. If they receive the correct authorization codes, they must allow boarding for surprise inspections. You have those codes? I have something better. My clutchmate works in the Vaxian bureaucracy. If I can convince him to generate false inspection orders..." Crix trailed off, his fear palpable. Lila placed a gentle hand on the alien's arm, her telepathic abilities allowing her to sense his internal conflict. "You're afraid they'll kill him if they discover what he's done." "The Vaxians don't just kill traitors, they make examples of them, and their families." Crix's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake looked between his 2 companions, weighing the risks. "Crix, I can't ask you to put your clutchmate in danger, but those children are dying," Lila finished, her connection to the young Kalari growing stronger with each passing moment. "I can feel them giving up hope. Whatever the Vaxians are doing, it's breaking their minds." Crix was quiet for a long moment, his alien features unreadable. Finally, he activated a secure communication channel. The conversation that followed was conducted in rapid Vaxian, punctuated by long pauses and what sounded like desperate pleading. "It's done," Crix said finally. "The inspection orders will be transmitted in 20 minutes. We'll have a 6-hour window before anyone realizes they're fake." Jake began plotting an approach vector to the prison ship. "What did you tell your clutchmate?" "The truth? That we're trying to save children from the neural conditioning chambers." Crix's throat sac deflated. He agreed because his own offspring was taken by the military last season. He understands what it's like to lose family to the Vaxian war machine. As they approached the Torment, Lila's telepathic abilities painted an increasingly disturbing picture of what was happening aboard the prison ship. The Kalari children weren't just being held, they were being systematically broken, their natural telepathic abilities corrupted and turned against them. "They're creating telepathic weapons," she reported, her voice tight with horror. "The conditioning process forces the children to experience artificial guilt and trauma, then amplifies it through their abilities. They're being turned into living weapons of psychological warfare." Jake's hands tightened on the controls as the Defiant docked with the prison ship. The inspection charade worked perfectly, too perfectly, setting off alarm bells in his experienced mind. Something's wrong, he muttered as they prepared to board. This was too easy. His instincts proved correct. The moment they stepped aboard, the torment, blast doors sealed behind them, and armed guards emerged from concealment. At their head stood a figure that made Lila recoil in telepathic horror, a Vaxian wearing the distinctive neural crown of a mind-ripper. "Captain Morrison," the alien said in perfect, emotionless English, "we've been expecting you. Your reputation for keeping impossible promises has made you quite valuable to our research division." Crix made a sound of anguish. "They were monitoring our communications. My clutchmate is being processed as we speak," the mind-ripper confirmed. "His neural patterns will provide valuable data on alien concepts of family loyalty." Jake's hand moved toward his weapon, but a dozen Vaxian soldiers already had him in their sights. "What do you want?" "You specifically. A human who has successfully interfaced with Kalari neural patterns. And her," the alien gestured to Lila, "a Kalari whose telepathic abilities have been restored after extended suppression. Together, you represent unprecedented research opportunities." As they were marched deeper into the ship, Lila reached out, desperately with her telepathic abilities, trying to contact the imprisoned children. What she found instead changed everything. The children weren't just victims, they were fighting back. Deep within their neural dampeners, their suppressed abilities had been growing stronger, fed by their shared determination to resist. They'd been waiting for someone to show them hope, and now that hope had arrived in the form of a human who kept his promises and a Kalari who had learned to be free. The real battle for their freedom was about to begin. In the deepest detention level of the torment, Jake and Lila were thrown into a cell designed specifically for their capture. Neural inhibitors lined the walls, and monitoring devices tracked their every movement. But the Vaxians had made a critical error. They underestimated what a kept promise could accomplish. "The children are 3 levels below us," Lila whispered, her restored telepathic abilities picking up their faint mental signatures despite the neural interference. "They know we're here. They're preparing for something." Jake examined their cell with the eye of someone who'd escaped from dozens of similar situations. Vaxian construction is solid, but they rely too heavily on their technology. There's always a mechanical backup. Through the ship's communication system, the mind-ripper's voice echoed coldly. "Captain Morrison, your neural patterns are fascinating. Guilt-based promise-keeping appears to be hardwired into human psychology. We're particularly interested in testing the limits of your compulsion." On the cell's viewing screen, images appeared of the 12 Kalari children in their individual conditioning chambers. Jake's breath caught as he saw what the Vaxians had done to them. Neural crowns similar to the mind-ripper's own device were being forced onto their heads, designed to corrupt their natural telepathic abilities. "We're going to turn them into weapons," the mind-ripper continued. "Telepathic broadcasters of guilt and despair, capable of breaking entire populations' will to resist. But first, we want to see what happens when you're forced to break your promise to save them." Jake's jaw clenched as he worked on the cell's locking mechanism. "I don't break promises. Everyone breaks eventually. We simply need to find the right pressure point." That's when Lila smiled. The first genuine smile she'd worn since her world died. "You still don't understand, do you? You can't break someone who's already chosen to keep their word no matter the cost." She closed her eyes and reached out with her telepathic abilities, pushing through the neural interference with sheer determination. What she found in the lower levels filled her with fierce joy. The Kalari children had been busy. For months they'd been quietly teaching each other meditation techniques that their ancestors had used to strengthen telepathic bonds. The neural dampeners had suppressed their abilities, but hadn't eliminated them entirely. Working together, sharing their collective strength, they'd been preparing for this moment. "Jake," Lila said, her voice filled with wonder, "they want you to know that humans aren't the only ones who keep their promises. The children made a promise to each other, that they'd all escape together, or not at all." The ship's lights suddenly flickered. In the detention levels below, 12 young Kalari were simultaneously overloading their neural dampeners, using the collective strength of their restored telepathic abilities to create a feedback cascade that would disable the ship's entire control system. Alarms began blaring throughout the torment, as the children's coordinated effort sent energy surges through the vessel's neural network. Jake's cell door clicked open as its electronic locks failed. "Now!" Lila shouted, and together they burst from their prison. The corridor outside was in chaos. Vaxian guards stumbled around in confusion as their neural command implants malfunctioned, overwhelmed by telepathic feedback from the children's coordinated effort. Jake and Lila fought their way through the ship, heading for the detention levels. They found the Mind Ripper in the central command chamber, frantically trying to regain control of his ship's systems. His neural crown sparked and smoked as the children's telepathic assault overwhelmed its circuits. "Impossible," he snarled as Jake burst through the door. "The dampeners should have prevented any coordinated effort." "You never understood what you were dealing with," Jake replied, his weapon trained on the alien. "You thought fear and pain were the strongest forces in the universe, but you were wrong." Lila stepped up beside him, her eyes blazing with telepathic energy. Hope is stronger, love is stronger, and promises kept in love are strongest of all. The Mind Ripper made one last desperate attempt to activate the children's conditioning chambers, but his controls exploded in a shower of sparks as the children's combined telepathic power surged through the ship's neural network. In the detention levels below, 12 Kalari children stood free for the first time in months, their neural dampeners reduced to smoking metal around their feet. The eldest, a girl named Kira who couldn't have been more than 14, reached out telepathically to Lila. "The human kept his promise," came her mental voice, filled with wonder. Just like in the old stories, Jake and Lila raced through the ship's corridors, finding the children gathered in the central detention area. They were thin and pale, but their violet eyes blazed with determination and newfound hope. When they saw Jake, several of them stepped forward. "Thank you," Kira said in accented standard. "We felt your promise through Lila's mind. We knew someone was finally coming who wouldn't abandon us." Jake knelt down to their level, his voice gentle. "I made a promise to get all of you home safely. That promise isn't complete until every single one of you is back with your families." Through the ship's communication system, they could hear Vaxian reinforcements arriving, but Jake had one more card to play. He activated his ship's emergency beacon, not a distress call but a message that went out across the galaxy to every free species, every resistance cell, every survivor who still believed in fighting back. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Defiant," he broadcast. "I'm transmitting the location of a Vaxian prison ship and evidence of their neural conditioning experiments on children. Any species that still believes in protecting the innocent, now is the time to act." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships from a dozen different species dropped out of hyperspace around the torment. Human vessels, free Kalari survivors, even some Vaxian defectors, like Crix's clutchmate, who had managed to escape with stolen ships. The Vaxian Mind Ripper, his neural crown now completely destroyed, stared in shock at the tactical display. "This is impossible. No alliance this diverse has ever..." "Has ever what?" Lila interrupted, her telepathic abilities allowing her to sense the approaching fleets. "Unified purpose. Has ever been held together by kept promises. You're right, but that's exactly what's happening." As rescue shuttles docked with the prison ship, Jake watched the Kalari children reunite with their families. Kira found her parents among the survivors, and their telepathic reunion sent waves of joy throughout the ship that even non-telepathic species could feel. But the most powerful moment came when Aunt Vera materialized in the docking bay, her elderly form moving with surprising speed, as she embraced Lila for the first time in 3 years. "You were right to trust him," Vera whispered in Kalari, her words carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "Some promises transcend species, transcend worlds. They become part of the fabric of the universe itself." Jake stood to the side, watching the reunions with quiet satisfaction. Crix approached him, the young Vaxian's demeanor completely changed from when they'd first met. "My clutchmate is safe," Crix reported. "The resistance helped him escape before the authorities could retaliate, but I have to ask, why? Why risk everything for people you'd never met?" Jake's answer was simple. "Because someone has to keep their word. Because every promise kept makes the universe a little bit brighter, a little bit more worth saving. Months later, the rescue of the Kalari children became a turning point in the galactic resistance against Vaxian expansion. The footage of 12 telepathic children walking free, followed by a human who had risked everything to keep his word, spread across thousands of worlds. But Jake's work wasn't finished. There were more promises to keep, more children to save. More proof needed that some bonds couldn't be broken by fear or cruelty. The Defiant became a legend, a ship that appeared wherever the enslaved and oppressed needed hope. And aboard that ship, a human captain and a Kalari telepath continued to prove that some promises were worth keeping, no matter the cost. Because humans always keep their word, and in a galaxy full of broken trust and shattered hope, that's simple. Truth became a beacon that could never be extinguished. The end,